Good evening. I would like to give you all a very warm welcome on this to the Museum of Texas Tech University on this warm evening. We are very excited to have you here, and it gives me great honor to introduce President Skovanec. Please join me in welcoming President Skovanec.
Have to use both. Thank you, Aaron. Is this working? Can you hear me? Yes. First, I want to thank Victoria for asking me to make a few comments. We were visiting outside, and we've known each other for about 20 years. Wow. And in that time, the number of instructors and faculty in the Italian program has doubled. They now have 2. But over the years, Victoria has brought a number of remarkable intellectuals, scholars, innovators to this campus. And tonight is one of those occasions. We're very privileged to have Marc Balet here. And I was visiting with him just before we came down. And when you look at his credentials and all he's achieved, and Victoria will provide a bio, this is kind of silly for me to say this, but last year, I told him I became more familiar with him last year as I was preparing for the visit of Fran Lebowitz, who came here and spoke in the President's Lecture Series. I don't know if many of you may have enjoyed that. She came to my home for dinner, and I was nervous about hosting her because I have the impression she doesn't suffer fools. And so I read a couple of her books, and then I was just going through the internet doing scientific research using Google. And I came across this delightful video, and it was called An Enviable Loft Fran Lebowitz Has Never Liked. And it is a dialogue between Marc and Fran Lebowitz. And you can actually see what an incredible and interesting person Marc is. But the world he's lived in, the spaces he's affected, the people he's known and collaborated with is really, really remarkable. And we are very fortunate to have you here on our campus this evening. I do think events like this are important for another reason. So Marc, you should understand the designation of our university as Texas Tech University is really a misnomer. The largest college on this campus is Arts and Sciences, but the effect of the arts, the humanities, the social sciences is very profound. And it is that breadth that makes this really an outstanding university, and events like tonight are a great example of that. So Victoria, thank you so much for what you've done to bring these kind of remarkable talents to our campus. And with that, I'll ask Dr. Pan to come out and introduce Victoria.
It gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Victoria Surliuga. Dr. Surliuga is Associate Professor of Italian Studies, World Cinema, and Italian Program Coordinator at Texas Tech University. She's a scholar of modern and contemporary Italian art, cinema, and literature. She was awarded the 1905 Fellowship of Mount Holyoke College Alumni Association twice, a CH Foundation grant to the Italian program at Texas Tech University, scholarship catalyst grants from Texas Tech University, and has been Humanities Fellow twice at the Humanities Center of Texas Tech University. Her publications include Giulietta Massina and Marcello Mastroianni, Blurring the Animus Anima Archetypes, and Ezio Grabado, The Man in the Middle of Modernism, which received first place President's Faculty Book Award, Texas Tech University in 2018. Her interviews with Marc Balet and Fran Lebowitz were published in the Journal of American Culture and Italy.com. Please join me in welcoming Victoria.
Thank you, Aaron. Hello, everyone. I'm glad that you're all here tonight. Thank you, Marc, for being here. I'm honored to introduce you, Marc Balet, and your work as a conceptual architect and introduce you as one of the most impactful creative minds in contemporary American fashion and art. And Marc Balet's work in architecture has been featured in the New York Times, Architectural Digest, Domus, Musée, and many other known venues. His work was recognized in the 70s with the Prix de Rome in architecture and a fellowship at the American Academy of Rome, 73-75. He was also awarded a solo exhibition, Dream Housing, in 1973 by the Architectural League of New York at the Windy Museum of American Art. He began his career in publishing and TV with Andy Warhol as creative director of Warhol's Interview magazine, 76-88, the MTV show Andy Warhol's 15 Minutes, 85-87, and designers and brands such as Armani, Saint Laurent, and many others. He collaborated with Martin Scorsese as creative consultant for the HBO production Public Speaking, 2010, and the Netflix series Pretend It's a City, 2021. He has a cameo appearance in Eyes of Laura Mars, directed by Irving Kershner in 1978, and is featured in the Netflix series The Andy Warhol Diaries in 2022. At the time when Marc Balet went his own way, Warhol wrote about Balet in his diaries, quote, "I would miss Marc. He's talented and he does a lot. Although he'd do even more if he weren't so busy with all his freelance stuff, the Armani ads and things," end quote. Warhol and Balet traveled together to Italy as well, and Balet translated for him from Italian into English the questions from journalists and came up with a sharp response to one of them, in response to how Warhol saw the world. He said, "Andy sees the world through contact lenses." Balet calls Architectural Tales his photographic simulacra of urban and environmental concepts, which he develops in a series of architectural structures that elaborate the constructs of cities, homes, gardens, open spaces, lakes, highways, within the frame of a sustainable and eco-friendly concept, with titles such as The Bleeding Arms Hotel, Instant City, The Room Above the Pool, The Topiary Home, or The Tree House. Marc Balet's work can be associated with Stefano Boeri's Vertical Forest. While the models have existed outside of the photographic sequences, Balet makes them permanent through his photographic works and the videos that he has made, as well as through his writings, such as the Dream House Journal, featured in Architectural Design in 1973 with the title of Cosmorama. Balet participated in collective art shows such as Habitats in 1983 at the MoMA PS1. According to Grace Gluck in the New York Times, quote, "Among works of freer association to the theme, Marc Balet's very theatrical fantasy piece, The Room Above the Pool, deserves a special mention. It's a real stopper," end quote. When in 1973 he was invited to have a solo exhibition at the Whitney Museum called Marc Balet Dream Housing, and defined by the New York Times as, quote, "imaginary structures by a young architect," end quote, the show was advertised in the September 1973 issue of Interview. In Jungian psychoanalysis, the house represents collective consciousness. And the house is a psyche, not only the one belonging to the individual, but also the collectivity. The collective unconscious, therefore, finds there its perfect image. To Marc Balet, the idea underlying conceptual architecture and invented spaces is the quote-unquote ideal house, as a Wunderkammer, as a container for multiple renderings through the rooms, or what Duchamp's would have called, Duchamp's concept would have been the boîte en valise. It is significant that in the 70s, Balet created the so-called topiary home, when the concept of environmental architecture was becoming relevant. The concept of the ideal house has taken the shape of a compelling narrative that Balet wrote in 73, the already mentioned Cosmorama. As far as the Jungian archetype of the house is concerned, Balet's ideal house echoes Federico Fellini's house, portrayed in Juliet of the Spirits in 1965, where the consciousness-unconscious combination with various rooms is tied to the aspects of the owner's personality. In many ways, Fellini's dream house in Juliet of the Spirits matched Balet's theoretical framework. Balet's narrative of a dream about a house explained his interest in creating the perfect house, both as an architect and in real life, by finding the right building to create and set up his life. The dream of Cosmorama is quite impressive, as well as visually stunning. And Balet, the subject of the dream, proceeds with his oniric tale. Quote, "Turning, I enter a large rose-colored room. I melt into the soft enveloping chair and I doze." End quote. There is a conversation going on around him. Quote, "Oddly enough, the few words I managed to overhear concern the very subject about which I am myself am dreaming. Tea, I hear. I live for a good cup." End quote. And at the end of the dream, Balet writes, open quote, "I slowly pace my cup of tea on the lace tabletop and make my way." End quote. This process bears resemblance with the psychological growth in adulthood. The safe zone of childhood, represented by the cup of tea, is left behind, and the process of individuation, according to Carl Gustav Jung, is completed, the individual having incorporated the social mask into the self. I am now going to let Marc discuss his work. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Wow, that was so deep. I didn't realize I was that deep. And we have this picture here to prove I'm not that deep. Thank you for coming tonight, and thank you, Victoria, and everyone else around. I'm just going to take you through a little show and tell of some of the work that I did in advertising, in magazines, and in architecture over a period of years. I went to Rhode Island School of Design. It's a very small art school in Providence. It's a life-changing place. It was amazing. And this was my yearbook picture. I guess kind of like a hippie Fred Astaire or something. I saw myself as an entertainer, and that's how I saw my advertising, and that's how I saw my architecture, to entertain people and to make them feel pretty good about themselves. This is where I lived in New York up until pretty much today. I just bought a house in Connecticut, so I'm moving there on Monday. But this was my loft. This was the living room and dining room of my loft in Manhattan. It was an amazing triplex on Houston and Broadway. And I made the entire wall into corkboard. And it seems like it was the wall, but it was really this material that you could just put push pins in. And so there were hundreds and hundreds of pictures from different periods of my life with lots of friends. And when they would come over, they all looked for their pictures. So I got beautiful little binoculars that I had on the table, so to make sure they didn't get upset with me that they couldn't see their picture on the wall. There's some other stuff on the wall. I was Andy Warhol's art director for 11 years. He gave me my first job out of school. And I was lucky enough to get a lot of stuff from him. So he gave me this particular artwork. He gave me that, the double fish, and this other piece here, and a whole bunch of stuff. And I just kept collecting things. This is a table I designed. Most of the furniture in the house I designed, actually. And it was a fantastic place to live. I lived there for 35 years until today, pretty much, or tomorrow. This is a close-up of some of the pieces that were on the wall with Brooke Shields, who was actually the first person to come to my loft. She was my first visitor. And it's so funny because Fran Leibowitz's father made my curtains for my house, which are 20 feet high. And when Brooke came in, she said, "Who did your curtains?" I said, "Oh, it was Fran's father." And she said, "Oh, he must have been really tall. I mean, these curtains are so big." And so I kept a lot of stuff. Now they're all in boxes. I'm going to put them up in the new house. This was my roof. I had built a house on the roof, and there were two gardens, one in the back, one in the front. This was the back garden. You're in the middle of Soho in New York, and I had a beautiful shower back there, and I had so many parties. I had parties for up to like 300 people in this house, and quite a few parties got shut down over the years by the police. But and this is me in the back again, where you go upstairs, and then around there was an outdoor shower I had built. So in the morning, for literally 5 months out of the year, I could go out and take a shower, and there were bees and flowers and butterflies around. It was a fantastic place. What's his name? What is his name? Steve Martin. I have a horrible memory. Steve came over one day to have his picture taken for a magazine. I'll show you the picture. And at one point, the photographer said, "Will you jump over the railing over Broadway?" And I completely freaked out. And I ran downstairs. I had an office then, and I put $1 million rider on him. And then I said, "Now you could jump over if you want." And so he took this picture on my roof. And there it is in the magazine, how it came out. And I gave many events. This is looking down at my place. It was my dream house, actually. I was looking for a dream house. I went 3 or 4 times to get it. I was finally able to get it. It was a dance studio, and I transformed it. There was a fireplace there, and I had lots of cookouts on the roof and had an amazing time. There's Fran, me, and Wendy Goodman, who's the one who actually did that piece where Fran hates my house. And it was a little 10-minute piece that we did together with Wendy, who's the editor of New York, one of the editors of New York Magazine. When I came to New York from Rome, after the Prix de Rome was done, my school was done, my year in London was done, I'd met Fran in Rome. She was visiting mutual friends of ours, and she said, "When you come back to New York, look me up." And I did. And I started to do little photographs for her column called "I Cover the Waterfront" at Interview. And that's how I got to sort of see Andy and hang out at the factory. And at one point, the job of art director came up, and Fran called me. I was sleeping on the couch of a friend of mine on Gramercy Park, and she said, "You have to go over to tell Andy you want to be the new art director." And I said, I'd never had a job. I said, "I can't go over and just be the art director of a magazine." She said, "Go right now." So I left where I was. I walked over to the factory, and I saw Andy, and I said, "Listen, can I be the art director of your magazine?" And he said, "Yes, you can." And that's how I got my job, and that's how I got my career, is just having the nerve to go over and ask for something you want and to kind of not be afraid of it. This was another one of the kind of architectural pieces that I did for her column, where she had one room basically, and she made believe like it was this, kind of spectacular apartment in the West Village. And this was the quote that Andy, I worked there for so long, saying that he would miss me. At one point, I was, after about 5 months of Andy paying me $100 a week to be the art director of Interview magazine. Even back in the day, it was not very much money. And my parents called me and said, you have to earn some money. We can't keep supporting you. We're not rich. I said, "Oh God, I guess I better get a job." So I went down and I got hired at a place called Vogue Patterns magazine, which was obviously a sewing magazine. And I got the job, and I was so excited about it, and they were paying me a real salary, and I went back to the factory, and I looked for Andy to tell him I was quitting, that I got a job that someone was going to pay me. And he was in Iran with the Shah at the time, which I didn't know. And I said, "Look, tell Andy that I'm so happy to have been the art director here for 5 months, but I got to leave. I have to, my parents aren't going to support me anymore." And that night I went back to my little apartment on 22nd Street, and the phone rang, and it was Andy calling from Iran. And he said, "No, you're not going to leave." I said, "Andy," "you're never going to pay me this salary. I got to move on." And he said, No, you're going to freelance interview, we're going to work around you, you're going to come at lunchtime and after work, don't tell your new bosses that you still have your old job. And that's what I did. I got on my bicycle at lunchtime and I said, I'm off to lunch. And I ran up to the factory and did my layouts and whatever else he wanted me to do. I'd go back to work again. And then I'd go back to the factory at the end of the day. And that's how I lived my life, is going back and forth for about 2.5 years. This is a cover of one of my best friends, Paul Rubens, recently passed away. And I spoke to Paul pretty much every day of my life. And he was an amazing guy. And Andy said to me one day, go up and I want you to see this comic. He's performing at Caroline's. And I said, all right, I'll go up there. And I took 2 people from the factory who were in the video department. And we went up to Caroline's and we saw him perform. And he was so amazing and charming. And we put him on the cover. We went out to LA to shoot this with a photographer called Herb Ritz, who's an amazing photographer. And he shot the cover of this. And we became better and better and better friends over the years. He was extraordinary. This became an iconic picture. It was a friend of ours' horse. He had a few horses up there. And we went out to the fields and took these pictures of Pee Wee as a cowboy. Calvin, Bruce Weber had been shooting Calvin's campaign for a long time. So he was the natural choice to shoot Calvin in his West Side apartment that he had at the time, this beautiful duplex on Central Park West. And we had a fantastic day with Calvin. And then Bruce said, well, you're doing all your underwear ads. Let's put you in underwear. So we shot Calvin in his underwear in his living room, smoking a cigarette, which was a pretty great and pretty shocking piece at the time. This was Mick Jagger. And what I liked to do when I was photographing a lot for interview, when I was art director there, is I would go to a studio and I would set up different little tableaus in a studio. So you kept it moving, the subject matter didn't get bored. We would take them off the set, change the hair and makeup, change the clothes, and then get back on the set again, take them off, change them, get back on the set again. So there was very little time for boredom, basically. I think Mick had put a diamond in his tooth at that time, so we highlighted that. And then I wanted to photograph Mick with I got all these old records. I had these photographs done of these old records and put them up on the wall. And I wanted there to be a light on his face, but Andy was so cheap, he wouldn't rig it up for me. So I ran and I rented, I'd never buy anything. I rented a light and turned on the light, and so there's that light on Mick's face as he's doing what Mick does. For Aretha Franklin, I took Albert Watson out to, Aretha suffered from agoraphobia at the time, and so she wouldn't leave her house. And Andy wanted her on the cover, so we flew to Detroit, somewhere outside of Detroit, to do her cover. And she was kind of fantastic, not kind of fantastic. She had just done this music called Highway of Love or something, and they mentioned a pink Cadillac, so I went and got a little miniature pink Cadillac to bring out to her at her house. And I remember looking through this window that she had in her kitchen, and she was sitting at the table, having her hair done with spoolies, if anyone knows what spoolies were. And she was having her done with spoolies. She would only do her own hair and makeup. So I said, fine. And she was eating a big bucket of chicken. And she was sitting there eating chicken, having her spoolies done. And I put the music on her Victrola of her record. And she came out. And then she and I started dancing to her music. And so we had this amazing time of her and me having this kind of great moment in her living room. I had the most amazing day with her. And as I was leaving, she had a ranch house, and she was standing in her hallway leading to her bedroom, which had a padlock on it, which I found a little weird, with all her gold records in the narrow hallway. And as we were leaving at the end of the day, she had changed into a nightgown, and she had a drumstick of chicken, and she had a cigarette. And she saw me looking at her, and she said, "This is the picture you really wanted, isn't it?" And it was the picture I really wanted, and she knew I knew I was never going to get it, but she was amazing. With Cindy, I had a long meeting with her, and I wanted her to do another thing for me, but she wouldn't do it. And so with Matthew Ralston, I think Matthew shot this, we got an amazing headdress from the 20s, from MGM, from the Fox lot or MGM, I can't remember where, and we made her into this vamp from the 1920s. And this was way back in the day when she was running around, you know, with her crazy hair, and we made her into this kind of beautiful 20s movie star. She's a great girl. You know, Andy kept saying, you know, let's make money with art. Let's do art and photography, do something where we can, you know, get the advertisers happy. So I came up with Robert Becker, who was one of the editors of the magazine, of doing shoe boxes, not to do something with the shoes, but to do something with the container of the shoes. So this is Keith Haring. We had him do a shoebox, and Julian Schnabel, and we had all these kind of up and coming artists at the time who became super famous. And we had a beautiful show of all these boxes, and it was a big success. It got into a lot of magazines. This was a photograph that we did with Susan Sarandon, and I wanted her with a gown blowing in the wind. This is what I imagined, and I got a big backdrop to make it be very kind of luxurious and very upscale. And this is a picture of me holding her dress, trying to get the damn thing to fall the right way so we could get the picture. Everything for me was the photograph. I only liked people if they would give me great photographs. If they didn't give me good photographs, I didn't want to speak to them, basically. It was super important. It still is super important to me. And Andy, again, wanted art and commerce. So what I would do is, through a year of photography, we were doing all these famous celebrities. This is like Grace Jones and Twiggy and Marissa Berenson and Julie Haggerty and Ursula Andress and Susan and all these different people. And we'd photograph them during the year. As we photographed them during the year, I would always do like one picture, let's say with jewelry, like a close-up. And I would take those pictures after a year. I would get 12 or 10 pictures, and then I'd run it as a special series. So this was one of the special series that we did. That's with Brooke and Susan. And the jewelry companies loved it because they got their jewelry on these famous women. Andy loved it, and I loved it because I got great photography. There's Julie and Ursula Andress, who was so beautiful at the time. And Grace, and I just put a big chunk of diamonds in Grace's mouth, and then she knew what to do, basically. And Carol Alt. This actress, I'm trying to remember her name now. Do you know? She was in Romancing the Stone and stuff. She was an incredible actress. And who? Kathleen Turner, thank you. Who said that? Thank you. So Kathleen Turner came, and I said, you know, this was in the days before retouching. When I first came to interview, and I said to Andy, listen, I have to retouch this picture. He said, retouch a picture? He said, and Fred Hughes was there, his assistant, and he took out an eraser of a pencil, and right on the photograph, he just erased the lines, and that's how we retouch pictures in the beginning at interview, with the back end of a pencil. But we did this, I had this straw made, and then we had this drink, and I started to experiment with different type treatments for the magazine. She was such a great gal to do it. This was a photographer named David LaChapelle who went on to incredible fame and fortune. And I gave him his first job at interview. I used to call him the Bumblebee because he always dressed in yellow and black, and I would always say, well, get the Bumblebee to do this, and we'll use him for these pictures. And he was brilliant then, and he's brilliant now. He's a fantastic photographer. I had a dream one night. I can't, of a woman descending a gold staircase. And I came into the factory and we were doing this gal and for the cover. And I said, you know, I want to make a gold staircase for jewelry for her. And I went to a jeweler and he made the staircase. In the back, it's completely rigged up with her ear. And again, no retouching. We just had to shoot it. And Richard Bernstein always did the covers. So it was so great in those days because I could have a dream and then come in and then make it a reality on a celebrity. That's Catherine Oxenberg, by the way, was a TV star at the time. I also was the art director of Andy Warhol's 15 Minutes, which was a TV show on MTV. It was a half-hour show. And that's me and Andy. And I guess we're filming something at the factory. That's a Twiggy cover that we were doing. I look exactly the same. It's unbelievable. I don't know how I did it. Odd. And then this is with Jean-Michel Basquiat in Italy, in Milan, with me and Andy and another friend of ours. And I brought Andy to Italy to sell his portraits to all these kind of wealthy parents that I'd gone to school with over there. And I'd never really been with Andy in a place that was where he was like a superstar, and people ran after the car in Milan. When they saw that it was Andy, they'd run down the street after him, and it was so shocking to me because, you know, when you work with someone every day for 8, 9, 10 years, you don't think of them as a superstar. This was Uma Thurman. After Andy died, I started a magazine called Fame, and Uma, we decided to use Uma on the cover of this prototype that we were doing. And that was the night we painted her gold. I wanted to do her all gold for the issue. And then I said, you know, she got a phone call that night and she got the lead in Liaison Dangereuse. That was the night that she kind of became a star. And we were all together, you know, photographing her. Nick Nolte. We had to go to California to shoot this for Connoisseur magazine. I did Connoisseur for a couple of years. And Nick, I had all of this stuff made for him. I wanted to do this thing called Nick at Night. And we went to his house. He had a great house out in Malibu somewhere, driving up with a truck full of clothes that I had made for him. Everything said Nick at Night. I had big jewelry made Nick at Night. I had a leather jacket made Nick at Night. And we get to the house, and I go into the house, and I said, Nick, we're going to do you as Nick at Night. And he said, and he walked out, and he saw the truck filled with clothes, and he said, I can't do that. And I, like, sweat broke out on my face. I said, what are you talking about? He said, I'm going through a divorce, and I can't be seen as like a playboy. I can't do Nick at Night. So I completely freaked out. We had to put him in this other stuff. And I ran through his house, and I found on his piano a glass globe, and I shoved it in his hands, and I said, take the picture. And so we said, we talked about him, about the future, what his future will bring, and we made it seem like we did it on purpose. And I put him in all this green. He had all these cactuses on his driveway, and I put him in this beautiful green clothing that I had brought, and the Prince of Hollywood. And it turned out pretty good. I don't know how the divorce went. This picture for Connoisseur, I had to go to Spain, to Madrid, to do this. Espartaco was his name, and he was the new hot matador. And so I went to Madrid with this photographer, and we fly to Madrid, and he was in a hotel, holed up in a hotel before his bullfight. I'd never been to a bullfight. And we get there into the lobby, and he sends a messenger down to the lobby saying he doesn't want to do the photo shoot. I said, I just flew from New York to do your portrait. He said, I'm sorry, I just can't do it. So we freaked out, and I'm looking around the hotel lobby, and I see this beautiful Spanish girl sitting there. And I went over to her, and I said, I'll give you $100 if you go up to Espartaco's room and make him do this photo shoot for me. And she looked at me like I was out of, I said, here's his room number, go up and say hello and get him down here, and you have $100. And she did it. He gave me like, all of a sudden he came down. I don't know what happened. I don't care what happened. I got my photograph, and he said, I'm giving you 5 minutes in front of the hotel. Luckily, there were these plants in front of the hotel. I said, just stand there. And I got my picture. And then we went to the bullfight, and that was the only one I went to, and I haven't been to one since. For Stallone, he saw himself as a painter at this point. So we just did him as a painter. We went out again to LA to his house. And I remember I looked out the window and I said, Sly, I said, I didn't know you lived on a highway. And he said, I don't live on a highway. I said, well, what's that? He said, that's my driveway. It was so huge. It was like a 4-lane driveway. I'd never seen that before in my life. And then he had an amazing statue of himself perfectly placed outside the window, about 10 feet tall, which I have a private picture of. This was in just some of the pictures that we did that I loved over the years. This is something I did in Palm Beach. And we went down there and we worked with Cartier and Tiffany and a lot of the jewelers on these amazing rings. And just off camera are probably 10 or 15 guards looking at every single thing we did while we're trying to make these really kind of beautiful pictures. This is at Vogue Patterns. This was just one of the covers that we did, and Vogue Patterns took me all over the world. We would literally spin a globe, blindfolded, and then we'd pick a spot, and we could go anywhere we wanted. So we ended up in Bali, and in Tahiti, and in Rome, and in Central America, all over the United States, in Thailand. And I've been writing these stories down about the crazy drug-filled years of being at Vogue Patterns and Interview, and the craziness that went on with the girls and the guys and the fashion. And I'm doing it with a magazine called museemagazine.com, and you could look them up. And I've just been writing these little short pieces about what it was like to work in the fashion business at that time and how nutty it was. This is Christy Brinkley back in the day in Rome, with a model named Lisa Cooper. And I remember I was with Lisa, with Christy, and we're lying on the lawn somewhere, and some girls came up to her and asked her for her autograph. And I said, how do they know who you are? You're just a model. She said, well, you know, Mark, they're starting to put my name in the magazines now. We're becoming more well-known. I said, why? I couldn't figure out why these girls were. And then she went on to be, of course, you know, super famous and a great, great gal. When Gianni Versace came to New York, I took him on the Staten Island ferry and for Vogue Patterns. And we did these kind of hilarious pictures of him. He was such a really, really great guy. And these are some of the first pictures he did in New York. I did a magazine with Jared Kushner, who you may know who he is. He owned a newspaper in New York, and he wanted to do a Sunday supplement. And so I got hired to do this Sunday supplement, and we did all these. It only lasted one issue. It was a very difficult time for me, and to be working with him. It was a hard thing to do, but we did it. But I think we got some great, great photography. We worked with someone named Beyonce, and she was on the cover, and worked with her. And she was so amazing, Beyonce, because when I was with her, she was studying photography books all the time. She had a stack of books, and I watched her, and she was looking through the Avedon books and looking through the Vogue books to study how people posed and what they did and what they wore. And she was really educating herself on style, basically. Incredibly impressive. And Madonna, I worked with Madonna a few times. This was with a photographer named Arthur Elgort, who was a big Vogue photographer back in the day. And I wanted to do Madonna natural. Everyone was gussying herself up and, you know, with all the makeup. I said, let's bring her down, just make her more normal. And the editor of the magazine hated the pictures. and took her off the cover, and I didn't get a cover out of that. But I think it's a nice picture on her. Huh? Yeah, natural. She was pretty.
That's what she looked like when she was young.
Yeah, but we all looked a little better when we were young. This is some advertising I did with Albert Watson for a jewelry company, and I imagined these bubbles floating around this gal, and inside he is a designer of pearl jewelry, beautiful pearl jewelry, very expensive. And so we did my company started to design websites for a lot of different companies in New York and in Europe. And so Pearl ID was one of them with W. Rosado. And so I started to do these, I thought, pictures that you'd have to look twice at, when you're clicking a million sites to stop and take a look. That was the photograph. It took a lot of retouching, thank God. And this was one for men wearing pearls. And I wanted it to be like secretive and dark, but masculine, but it was hard to, I thought, how am I going to make this be masculine when he's wearing a pearl? But I think we did it on this, and he was an incredible model. That's how we shot it. That was the setup that Albert did, and Albert's an extremely successful photographer. That was another one we did with just hanging it on his lip. And then I designed this bottle. I got into designing product for a little while, and there was these friends of mine who were doing this honey. It was very expensive. This was $60 a bottle of honey. It was only at a few stores in the United States. And I wanted the honey bottle to look like perfume, as though a woman could have it in her boudoir as well as on the kitchen table or something. And so I designed this. It's very thick glass done in Mexico. And the honey was a special honey that you could only gather the nectar for like 2 weeks out of the year or something in one particular spot in Mexico. I did a lot of hip hop advertising. And this is one of the ones that I did with a guy named Joel Santana. And for Lot 29, I did so much of this. And Joel's, you could only let him stand someplace. He was pretty much stoned all the time. So I said, Joel's, just stand there, put the phone up to your ear. You don't have to do anything else, no walking, no talking, because he couldn't do it. And then we had a thing where I would sketch out what I wanted to do. So I said, you're going to be there. I brought these old cars to, I think we were in some plateau in Utah, and I had all these cars brought up to this location, obviously in the mountains, and then they had a tie-in with the cartoon people, and I'd give them the sketch of how I wanted Daffy to be, and then in post I'd put in Daffy, and then had this kind of weird advertising for hip hop kids. This was another one that I had these signs brought to Utah, and I labeled that this was Daffy Duck in case people didn't know, and that was Joel Santana, and then we had this kind of hilarious advertising. I did this one also, sketched it out. I think it's Wile E. Coyote or someone. I think that's who that is. And sketched out how I wanted Joel's to be. And then I said, just stand there like this. There's going to be somebody there. And drew it in later and did it in this beautiful scene. This was in Times Square. This was Omarion and Marcus Houston. And I wanted them to be looking down. I wanted them to be looking down onto you as you walk through Times Square for South Pole, another brand. And then I brought these guys, Mobb Deep. I brought them up to this beautiful place, this hotel that was outside of New York. And I said, you're going to get in canoes. And then I kind of screwed around with the background. I repainted the background to make it look cartoony also for South Pole. So these guys were not used to being in the country, certainly were not used to being in canoes, but it worked out really well. And then I never told the client that I was taking the picture, and I was only having obviously this picture done. But I said I want double pages for all the advertising, and then I just had everything flopped, the exact same thing, and it became this kind of super interesting visual. And then I get inspiration for product design and stuff. This was out of a sunset or a sunrise or something. I think it was a sunrise. And then I came up with, for One Life, this kind of happy, uplifting product design to make you feel good about yourself and to feel good about the product. When when COVID started, a company hired me, Nano Air, to design their website, and I wanted it to be not a happy time, but to not be so scary, basically. So we went out to Brooklyn, we were all wearing masks and everything, and shot this campaign for Nano Air. And this was how, when you scrolled from one page to the next explaining what this particular brand did for you and why the mask was a great mask. I don't really know how great it was, but you know. I was the creative director at Barney's New York, and for about 3 years, and launched the women's department for Barney's. This was with a wonderful photographer no longer with us named David Seidner, who was fantastic. And I did advertising for a lot of advertising for them. This was for Karl Lagerfeld. Took a photographer to his house, to Karl's house on the French, I guess it was the French North Atlantic or something, and shot this girl up in the, I worked for Karl for about 2 years, and I went to bring my layouts to him in New York, and I always look like this, even, back then it was probably worse. And I'm carrying the layouts with me, and a woman comes to meet me, and she said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Oh, I'm bringing Karl's layouts. I'm bringing the layouts that I just did for him." And she said to me, she thought I was I was just delivering. I was the delivery boy. I said, no, I'm the creative director for the company. And she said to me, "How dare you come to Karl Lagerfeld dressed like that?" And I said, "Well, I'm doing Saint Laurent's campaign, and he never had a problem with me." And she said, "Oh, okay, then there's no problem. You can come in." I was like, this was a campaign I did for a company called Candies. I don't know if they're still around anymore. They were a shoe company, kind of an inexpensive shoe company. And I did a campaign that was very sexual. I don't think I have the picture here, but you could look it up. It's been everywhere. And it was of a guy seated from the back, and the girl was straddling him and wearing candy shoes. And the campaign, it was called Take a Hike. It was for hiking, and she was telling the guy in the commercial, we shot a TV commercial, and she tells the guy to take a hike, and then it cuts, to Candies. And it became the cover of the New York Post because all these networks wouldn't show my commercial. And so it got on TV that way. This was a campaign I did for another jewelry company, just using broken mirror and beautiful lighting and gorgeous jewelry. I was asked by Nike to launch Nike Goddess, which became Nike Women. And I launched it with a series of little magazines. And I had to keep going out to Portland, Oregon, to kind of, they were my client. I had to go out there. And I had a great time. There were a bunch of little magazines, and it told all these great, crazy stories of women in sports and how great you could look with women in sports. I did this cover. This was the cover. It was like, take 2 sneakers in the morning and you'll feel better all day if you take the Nike sneakers. So that lasted for a couple of years, actually. This was a campaign I did for a web design for an old-fashioned antiques company, like on 18th Street or something. And they hired me to come in to rejuvenate these old pieces. So I came up with these ideas with a fantastic photographer named Torkel Gudnason. And we photographed, I sketched everything out, and each part, each division of their antiques company had a different, photograph heading for it. This was obviously glass. This was one of the other ones, again with broken mirror, and having their pieces. So when you came to this page on the site, you had this beautiful image of it. This was a company I did called Aromasis, and it was a company that put scents into various places, like in Vegas, in the gambling casinos. People didn't know this, but when you went in to eat, there was a certain scent that came out into the dining room that made you not want to stay there. And they had another scent that they put in when you were gambling to calm you down, so you'd want to stay and have a fabulous time. So I did the website. I'd never heard of this before, but and so I had these beautiful flowery, floral pictures done. I was hired by Jockey to enliven their image, basically. And again, we shot this in Los Angeles. I think I shot these individually with a crane over these beds that I brought into this park in the middle of Los Angeles. And then I softened the logo by just making the edges a little bit softer, and they didn't want it to be so masculine anymore. I said, well, I have an idea. I'll just soften the edges of your logo. That was another one, their thermals. And it was so simple. It was just in this park. I had a white cube made and put this great guy on it, and great girl. This was a Suzanne Bartsch, if you know, well, you know Suzanne Bartsch. I don't have to, and Suzanne was doing these fake eyelashes, but she was doing them the most extraordinary, crazy eyelashes. And so she asked me to come in to do a website for her and to have her, those eyelashes were so amazing. I'm not sure if she's still doing them. I hope she is. There she is, and that's the picture I had done of her with a beautiful big bubble of hair and then those beautiful eyelashes. I launched Ben Sherman, if you know what Ben Sherman is, a big English brand, and I launched it in America with this, instead of shirt makers, I crossed it out and said troublemakers. They were that kind of a tough lad kind of brand from the UK, and I launched it with the guy, put a scar on him and all that, and the flag. When Paul did his show in Hollywood and in New York, I did the posters for all of it, with a guy named Ryan Cox, who did all the illustrations and reimagined all his characters. And we did his posters, and I did a book for him and some other stuff. This was an ad campaign I did for Etienne Agnier, which is a German brand. And instead of doing the regular kind of advertising, I thought, well, let's make it be more family. The woman, it was probably in her late 30s, early 40s, and so I just did it with these little kids downstairs wanting their mother, come on, let's go, or we want to get going. I did a lot of music books. I did this one in the Montreux Jazz Festival, the 4-volume set. I did this over 2 years. I had to keep going back to Switzerland to get it done. There's a book by a painter named Kenny Scharf that some of you may know. So I did the book for Rizzoli for him. That's Kenny on the left. And that was the beginning of the book, the design of his book. Antonio Lopez, who was one of the genius illustrators of our time, no longer with us, but he was an amazing illustrator, and that was one of his illustrations. And he was a brilliant guy. I did his book. I did a book with Ahmet Ertegun, who owned Atlantic Records, and I wanted to find a hand that was an old blues hand. And I put a call out to people, and I found a guy in Brooklyn who was a custodian in a school, and I said, please come in, I heard about your hands. And he came to the studio, and I said, hold this microphone. And he held the microphone. I paid him, obviously. And I said, you're going to be on the cover of this. Your hands are going to be on the cover of this book. And that's what I did. I needed an old, like a weathered hand to be on the cover. This was Chris von Wagenheim, who was a great friend of mine, amazing photographer. And I designed his book. I did a book with Terry Southern for Virgin Records. And Terry Southern, you may not know the name, but maybe you've heard of Dr. Strangelove, 5 Easy Pieces. He did these all these incredible movies, and he would come over to my loft late at night and work with a guy named Perry Richardson, who was the editor for this publishing house, and we would create these, kind of fantastic layouts. If you ever go to the Juice Generation, there are all these, I don't know if they're out here or not. I designed the book for them. This book came out a few months ago. I did for Rizzoli. It was with amazing illustrator called Ruben Toledo. I'm doing a new book with Ruben when I get back to New York on Andre Leon Talley for Rizzoli, all illustrations. But this was a book that it was all about every famous fashion designer. And I named the book. I hated the name that was there, and Rizzoli said, okay, come up with a better name. And so I did come up with a better name, and we went with Bespoke, and then came up with the cover idea for them. And the book is out now. This was one of the interior shots in the book. That's another one. I mean, he's such an amazing illustrator. It's such a pleasure and joy to work with someone like that. You get so inspired. This I did for on immigration reform, and this went to all the senators and House of Representatives. I did it with with Rosie Perez, who's a really good friend of mine, and the actress Rosie Perez, and so she got all these great people to come and talk about what it meant to be a child of immigrants or an immigrant themselves, and we came up with this Fedoras for Fairness, and Albert Watson shot it. There's Rosie and. What's her name? Yeah, no, Ellen Barkin. Debbie Mazar and Bobby Cannavale. They all came in one day, and we got it all done. Billy Porter. And this is some of my architecture. This was I was a kid. I was 22, living in London. I'd moved up from Rome. I'd finished RISD in Rome, moved up to London, was trying to get a job in London. No one wanted to hire me. And I heard about this thing called the Prix de Rome, and someone I know had applied for it. And I said, well, I'll apply for it. And I suddenly got this letter saying that they wanted to fly me to New York and have an interview with me about possibly having the Prix de Rome. And I was so excited, so I flew to New York, and just before I went into the meeting was with I.M. Pei and all these super heavy hitters. And I got so nervous. I thought I was too young at 23, that they weren't going to give it to me. So I went and bought fake glasses so I'd look older when I went into the meeting. And I walked in with my fake glasses and had a meeting with these people. And I was so excited that I went back to Connecticut to my family, and they called me, and I said, did I win the Prix de Rome? And they said, well, we can't tell you that. They said, but we're awarding you a one-man show at the Whitney. So I said, oh, I guess I won the Prix de Rome if you're giving me a show at the Whitney. I mean, so this is Dream Housing, which has been the name of almost everything I've done. And this was Garden City, and I had imagined this huge, enormous city, but in the shape of vegetables. So I'd gone around Rome, and I'd picked out all these vegetables, and I cast them in plastic, and then had this whole city. There are many, many slides of this. This was the sports arena. This was an educational institute. There was the harbor where all these tomatoes were on different islands, and the vines were a means of transport between the islands. And that became, and they said to me then, they said, you're allowed to take out one ad. And they said, where'd you take it out? I said, oh, I'd love to be in Interview magazine, not knowing I'd be the creative director there a few years later. And that's where it went. This was another piece I did called The Treehouse. And at that time, all these architects were trying to do environmentally friendly houses. And I said, well, what could be more environmentally friendly than having your whole house grow out of a tree? So the pillows grew out of the tree, the mattress grew out of the tree, every single thing grew out of this tree. There were 4 rooms. This one was the bathroom. There's the bathtub that grew out of the tree and the toilet. And that's how I imagined environmental. That was the living room. And someone I knew, so I have no idea how to do this, actually made me that carpet for that space, which was incredible. That was when I was on the Prix de Rome. There's one of the tables that grows out of the tree, and a chair that grows down. And the narrative talks about how the caretaker prunes the chairs and waters the tables and makes sure that the bedding is well kept. That's the kitchen. And then this was a house that was garden apartments. And I imagine this beautiful housing development out of roses. And there's a beautiful moat around. I built this in my studio. And you could see that there's a beautiful little moat around there and the window details. And it's a housing complex built out of these concrete, I guess, roses. There's a close-up. And so what I do is I create these models, and then I go in with a macro lens and lighting and spend a long time photographing them so they seem real. There's a guy coming home at the end of his workday to his studio rose. And this is someone coming home in their Rolls Royce at the end of a long day. And for the duplex rose, you can get a duplex, you can get a studio rose, you can get a 2-bedroom rose, all different kinds of combinations. Window detail. This is something called My Bridgehampton. And it was, if you know the Hamptons at all in New York, I imagine my Bridgehampton being only made out of bridges, houses and bridges. And so I went out and got these different bridge construction toy things together and then photographed them to make them look real. This is like a little snippet of what there was. It was a big, long story. There he is, and there's another bridge house in the background. That's a night shot of one of the bridge houses. This is called the Etienne Agnier house. And there's a little bed made in the bedroom as the moonlight comes in. This is called the Bleeding Arms Hotel. And I call it the Bleeding Arms Hotel because in New York and in London, you're always at the Remington Arms Hotel, or it's very posh and very special. And so I thought, well, what happens if there was something called the Bleeding Arms Hotel? And it was a little bit macabre. I made it in Rome and made casts of my hand and made this hotel, this kind of macabre hotel of all these bleeding arms. And that was where people went swimming and had a fantastic time. I had a x-ray done of my arm, and then that was the floor plan, was the x-ray of my arm. There's some people having a really good time. And that's the portico that you drove under when you arrived at the hotel. You arrived under this portico of hands. This is a piece called Urban Dwelling in the Venetian Style. And I built these huge Venetian blind skyscrapers. I was actually doing it in a building on Great Jones Street that Andy owned. And one day Andy came up to me and said, "You have to get out of that building." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because Jean-Michel wants it, Jean-Michel Basquiat." And I said, "Well, I don't care if Jean-Michel wants it." He said, "Well, he's paying me, so you're not, so you have to get out." So I ended up doing this piece and then getting out. Looking down to the swimming pool. There's a little person sitting there. These are a series of knotted homes, and this one is for Vail, Colorado. And I built these homes out of rope, and it's a, you know, the language is super important for me when designing and coming up with an idea. And so the knotted home is Knotted, knotted home, but also not feeling at home, not feeling safe in your house, not being the protective place that you think it is. And so I built these models. This was in for Vail, Colorado, with the skaters outside. And this one was for the Hamptons. I did one for Vail and one for the Hamptons. This is a series I did fairly recently. It was my take on Frank Gehry. If you know who Frank Gehry is, in architecture, does all these incredible, you know, buildings. And I thought, well, what happens if Frank Gehry did suburban housing? What happens if he took his ideas of doing these incredible things and just came to Long Island and did a bunch of homes? So this is my take on Frank Gehry doing regular suburban homes. There's someone in the driveway in front of the house, window detail. And I always think just because you can do something doesn't mean you have to do something. So that's my feeling about it. And yet, for all of this architectural cocooning of, it still will always come down to a living room, a dining room, a bedroom, a bathroom. It's always going to come down to this inside. You're always going to come down to what humans need. So, and this is what his house would look like in a housing development in Long Island. All the gardens are the same, everything's the same, except you have this completely crazy house. This is, I put this in there, this is, I worked on Pretend It's a City with Fran Lebowitz. You know, I worked with Fran over, God, 40 years, I guess. I've interviewed her for all these different publications, and they asked me if I would interview her for Scorsese asked and if I would come in and work on this, and it was the most incredible experience. She was beyond hilarious. If you've seen the show, and I hope you have, it's on Netflix. It's a 7-part series. And I remembered as a child, I went to the World's Fair in Queens in the 60s. I think my parents brought me there. And I remember that they had an entire miniature New York in this building. And I was wondering if they still had it, and they did. And I told Marty and I told Fran about it, and we all went out to look at it. And if you saw the show, it's in there. That's it. And that's with her standing in the middle of this. And they keep updating the place. They keep updating the buildings in it. It's so spectacular. If you're in Manhattan, it's not in Manhattan, you'd have to go to Queens, but it's worth going to take a look at it. That's just my credit there. Oh, and this, I'm ending on, I started on my college yearbook, and this is my high school yearbook. This was the first picture I ever art directed in my life, and I got class chatterbox, as you might be able to tell. And so me and Barbara Green, I said, we're going to tie ourselves up and put this, and I ended up designing the yearbook. So that's my story. Thank you. I don't know. Thank you. Do you have anybody have a question? No? Okay. No, I'm just kidding.
I just wanted to say, I was at that World's Fair too.
Oh, you were?
I was 15 years old. I'm from Chicago, and I went to New York to look at boarding schools. I had a nervous breakdown, and I had to leave home.
Where'd you end up?
Stockbridge School in Stockbridge, Mass. But first I went to Poughkeepsie and looked at a boarding school there. But it looked too...
Yeah. New York is a tough place to be at private school.
My dad and I went to New York City, and we went to the World's Fair.
1964 or 66, something like that. 64, yeah. I mean,
I was 15. How were you?
well, I'm 75.
Okay.
So,
I'm 74.
yeah, so we're around the same age.
Somebody older than me.
Well, I look it.
It's also, yeah.
Any other questions about it? Oh,
What's your favorite part of the creative process? Probably from meeting clients, getting ideas.
I love to meet clients. I really do. I once was pitching one of these big jeans companies. I can't remember Marcassiano, but it wasn't Marcassiano. It was something like that. And I went into a big boardroom, and it was just the owner of the company, big, tough, burly guy, and his assistant, this woman. And I went into the room, and there's a long table with them at the end of it. And they said, well, what do you do? This guy said to me, what do you do? We need you here. And I said, well, I do kind of sometimes an emotional response to my advertising. And he said, like what? What would be something here for me? He was so mean. I didn't even know him, and he was mean. And I said, well, I would imagine an advertisement for you would be about a man who owns a company who doesn't pay enough attention to his children. And the children are angry with him. And he started crying. He started crying, and the assistant was like, oh my God, she had never seen him cry. He was so mean. And I didn't get the job, by the way. He hated me for making him cry. But that's the kind, I'll go in a second and come up with, I love to solve a problem for a client. They have, or my own problem that I make up to design something. So I come up, there's a problem, how do you solve it, visually, basically, with a marketing campaign. So that's why I have a very good time doing that. Yep. Way in the back.
Where else do you get your ideas from besides what you're doing?
Where do I get my ideas from? I get from me. I get my own ideas. I just talk to myself and I come up with my own ideas. I have no idea it's so hard to ask a person who comes up, like, how do you come up with a painting, or how do you come with, if you're working in advertising, yeah, they have a set of problems and you're there. So that's where I get my idea from, is how do I make this palatable to a public, basically. But when I'm working in my own studio, I just, someone will say something, I'll overhear something on the subway, or someone will say something funny to me and I go, oh, that's an idea. I write it down, because I have to write everything down, because as you can tell, I have no memory whatsoever. And that's how I do it. It's two paths. The advertising path is much different than the art path, basically. Oh, yeah.
If you could, with a relatively short answer, describe your personal aesthetic, what would you say? I mean, I see a lot of levity in your work and throughout all of your...
I think that the thread through my work is, it's kind of, the narrative is usually, in my architecture, it's usually commentary on what's going on. I gave a lecture years ago at the AA in London, the Architectural Association, and I showed some of this other work. And one of the architects there, I think his name is Peter Eisenman, who was a very famous, I don't know if he's still around, and he said, oh, Marc Balet's work is like Hiroshima. He said it's like destroying everything around it. And I thought, wow, I'm just showing little houses of, and that was his reaction to it. So people's reactions are very different depending if you're threatened or not threatened by it, Don't be threatened by it.
What was your impression when you first saw Gary's Louis Vuitton Foundation?
Oh, I mean, my first reaction to seeing Frank Gehry's, I love Frank Gehry's work, I really do. I mean, but, you're up for grabs. If you're out there doing it, you know, you can have a comment made about your stuff. And I mean, his stuff is so great, but I mean, it's a computer. I mean, it's so computer generated. That's why I think just because you can, maybe you don't have to. I mean, I'm a big lover of Barragan's work, and, you know, I mean, I usually like cleaner stuff, but his stuff is, you know, very beautiful.
So, who designed your house?
My house?
The house that you're moving into in Connecticut.
Oh, the one that I'm moving into that I left my loft? It was designed in 1800. It's a very old house. The people who were living there completely made it beautiful inside. I originally was looking for an old house, and I found a couple of really old houses that needed an enormous amount of work. And I just figured at my age, maybe I didn't want to spend 2 years of my life trying to put a house together and then make a cute little statement about it or something. So I found this house. It's on 10 acres. It has 2 ponds. It has a guest house, a beautiful pool. There's a big studio in the back for me to work in. And I walked into it with my friend, and I looked at him. I said, "No, I have to live here." I said, "How much? How much is the house? I have to have it." So I bought it, and I'm moving in Monday. So I'm literally, and my house was in a TV show. My house has been in a lot of TV shows, and it's been in the one I moved out of, and House and Garden and stuff. And it's been just 35 years, a long time to be in a place. But some guy came one day. I was interviewing photographers for something, and this guy came in, and he's looked around. He said, "I know this place," and I said, "Oh," I said, "How?" He said, "This used to be a reggae lounge," he said, "back in the late 60s, early 70s. And I came here, and I thought, oh my God, what a vibe to have in your house, is to have a reggae lounge." I told everybody that it was a reggae lounge at one point. I was so happy about it. But the new house is going to be, I don't know. I'll have it until I can't walk up the stairs anymore. And then, or if someone can't carry me up the stairs anymore. And then I might move back to New York and take a little 1-bedroom. But right now I have a lot of friends who live up, it's near Litchfield and Kent, around there. And it's a really beautiful area. And I'm you'll have to come by. If you're coming by, you have to come by. These are friends of mine.
What is your favorite food?
Food?
Yeah.
Oh, I eat almost anything.
We have a lot of food.
Oh, you do? You know, my favorite, whatever's put in front of me, that's my favorite food. I mean, I eat almost anything. Paul Rubens and we did so many trips together over the years, and he would always make fun of me. I didn't want to go to a Korean restaurant. I had a thing about Korean restaurants for no reason. And he would constantly, if I was in LA, drive up to a Korean restaurant with me. And I go, "Paul, I don't want to eat in a Korean restaurant." He'd go, "Oh, I forgot. He did it like every single time.
What are your best memories of Italy?
Oh my God. How could you have a bad memory of Italy? You can't have a bad. I spent a lot of time in Lake Como, and then we would drive up the Maloja Pass and up into San Moritz. And there's a fantastic restaurant on the way from Lake Como up to Switzerland. There's an amazing, called Courtage or something. I can't remember the name of it. The food is so heavy, it's like bricks when they bring it to you. You're just like having, and it's fantastic food. I mean, Italy for me is a dreamland, you know. I thought of moving back there at one point, and I just said, I can't redo it again. Do you go to Italy?
I've never been. I hoped to before I died.
Oh no, you gotta hurry. You have got to hurry. There's still time to get a late plane out to, you will not regret a second of it.
On both sides of my family, so many of my relatives have been, I've always loved French cinema, Italian cinema.
Yeah.
And Italian food.
Well,
Growing up in Chicago, you couldn't help it.
Italian cinema for me, it was my one regret, is never going out to try to meet Federico Fellini. I could have done it and I didn't do it.
And I saw Stealing of
Juliet of the Spirits.
17th birthday was when it came out, on my 17th birthday.
Wow. One of the all-time geniuses. Amazing. Oh, hi.
Hi. How did you find all of your opportunities to pursue all these different passions?
By not being afraid. I really say that to people, and I was saying earlier in the day is that I've tried to pass it on. How I got my job, how I got my start was not being scared to walk up to Andy Warhol, probably one of the most, if not the most famous living artist at the time, and ask him for a job. You just can't be afraid. Life's too short. You got to go for it. That's why at my age, I decided to split New York and go to the country and be a baby again, be a young, like wide-eyed, oh my God, what is this? What is this? I don't know what this is here. So you go and take a chance and do it. You're not going to get another chance, possibly. It's fun, And my mother used to say, the worst thing they could say is no, they're not going to kill you. I wasn't sure of that sometimes, but yeah, it worked out good.
Are there still great advertising agents in New York City?
Oh yeah, there's always going to be great. Now it's all online. Everything is online and stuff. There's so many great creative people working, and I go on Instagram. I follow all these amazing photographers. The time is different. It's all different. People's moods about the work is different, but there's just so many opportunities. I think still.
Nothing print.
Nothing what?
Print.
Print is, I do books. I'm starting 3 different books when I get back. So I keep my finger in print by doing that. I presented a project with using AR, augmented reality. So I found somebody to invest in that, and so I'm probably going to do a small augmented reality project. I'm hoping towards the beginning of the new year. I'm kind of excited about it. So you look for new stuff to do, and if you're not going to be working for a magazine anymore, you have to invent your own stuff. If you want to do it, if not, you can just relax. Oh.
What is one of your favorite memories of your time with Andy?
Andy was so funny with me. He was kind of mean sometimes, but I started working out. I didn't want to be that skinny anymore. This was years ago, like 40 years ago. And I went to a shoot one time. Andy never came to the shoots, never. But I was doing a male model shoot, and I had all these male models that were waiting for me in a hotel room, in a suite, because I was doing some story with male models. And I walked into the suite, and I look, and there's Andy in bed, lying in bed, with all these beautiful men around him. And I looked at him, I was so furious that he was there. And he went, oh, Mark, he said, God, Mark, he said, you used to be so handsome. He said, now you work out. He said, it looks like you're wearing a coat all the time. So everyone got a big chuckle out of that at my expense. So that's how he was. He could be that.
What does it mean to you to form so many relationships with influential people from all over the world?
What does it mean to have formed relationships?
With so many influential people.
I always wonder that also. I can't. Sometimes I think back, I go, how did this happen? I moved to London from Rome. I took the train up. I knew one person in London. I ended up renting a house in Canterbury Square with 2 other people who were architects in the architectural field. And so I knew 3 people. And I had written down the name of someone who you're not going to know, but you should, named Derek Jarman, who was an amazing filmmaker and artist in London. And I kept calling Derek, and he was not there. I didn't know him. And I called him as I was leaving. I couldn't get a job. No one would hire me, as usual. And he picked up the phone. And I went down to see him. He lived in a loft on the Thames. Nobody lived in a loft on the Thames at that time. And I went down to see him, and we spent the day. He had just finished a movie. He was art directing a movie called The Devils, and Women in Love he had worked on. And we started talking. He wanted to do a movie. And I said, well, my mother gave me a Super 8 camera. And I do my little films, my little architecture films with my... He said, let's do that. And so Derek Jarman started making movies with my little Super 8 camera. How the hell that happened? You know what I mean? Part of it is luck, and then you also make your own luck. And you just keep going, basically. And that changed, Derek Jarman changed the whole course of my life. Anybody? Oh.
Lots of really cool stories, interesting connections, and places that you've lived. If next week you could go to any of them again for a full week, what would you choose to do? What would you relive?
Where would I, you mean?
What would you relive?
What would I relive?
The last.
I think I'd probably relive the day I got my job with Andy, or I relived the day that I met Derek Jarman. I mean, it was, both were life-changing experiences. Going to Rhode Island School of Design, meeting Derek, meeting Andy, those you could feel. When I met Derek Jarman, I came back to my house that I had been living in, and I told my flatmates to come downstairs for a second. I had to talk to them. And I literally told them, I said, my life changed today. I could feel it. And I said, my life changed today, so please don't get angry with me as to what's going to happen next. And within 3 weeks, I was living in a rundown old warehouse in Hackney, where I had to tie up a chest of drawers because the wind came in so strong that it would blow it on me. And I went from living in a wonderful house to a mattress, to like a fold-out mattress that you would bring to the beach, you know, to lie on to get and I moved in with a guy named Andrew Logan, who is friends of mine to this day. And this was 1971, 72. And my life just changed. It was amazing. Because who would start coming over is, you know, David Bowie would be coming over, and Zandra Rhodes would be coming over, and we'd be having parties and events. And suddenly I went, oh my God, this whole, you know, I was hanging out with someone who became a really good friend of mine named Anita Pallenberg, who was married to Keith Richards at the time, and whose son I worked with on Marlon Richards, who I'm still friends with, who lives in England. Just things just snowballed, and sometimes we're out of control. It was a crazy life, I have to tell you. It wasn't, I'm glad I made it through, but, a lot of people didn't make it, you know. There's a documentary that I think you should watch if you're interested in all. It's on Hulu, and it's about a friend of mine who died in Rome named Danielle Luna, and she was an amazing model, and it tells her life story about coming to Italy and to London first and then to Italy, and I was fortunate enough to become friends with her. I can't remember how that happened, but I'm sure glad it did. And it's on Hulu, and it's called Danielle Luna, and you should see it because she's a woman who's kind of been lost in time, but was the first black model on any cover of Vogue magazine. She's gorgeous. She was gorgeous. She'd come up to the American Academy, and she'd be wearing a wig on, like a Mick Jagger wig, but it was always wrong on her somehow. But she was 6'1", and she was like this thin and beyond beautiful. And we would just spend the day together, you know? I mean, it was a dream. Huh?
And she died way too young.
Yeah. She's, and she had a beautiful daughter named Dream Katsaniga, who came to visit me when she was a teenager in New York. And I saw Danielle in an amphitheater in Rome, outside of Rome, the last time I saw her. And she turned around and saw me and waved. She was pregnant. And then she had the baby, and 18 months later she died. She OD'd. You know, there was a lot of that in Rome. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to get out of Rome, is the drugs were just too intense for me. That's it. Thank you.